about modern buildings, sites, neighborhoods, and landscapes in the greater Philadelphia area. You can donate through the Docomomo Philadelphia website. So to get us started this evening, our first panelist is William Whitaker, curator of the Architectural Archives of the University of Pennsylvania's Stuart Weitzman School of Design. He will be speaking about the WCAU TV station. Bill?
I think you're muted, Bill. Go ahead.
All right. Hello, everyone.
Great.
Get started again. So it's a great pleasure to be here tonight. And so I'm going to start by shamelessly plugging my lecture on April 28th for Lower Merion Conservancy, where I get to talk about this building and its expansive the expansive context of its making for an hour. Right now, I'm going to try to do that in 7 minutes. So here goes. So the relationship of city and suburb are in flux. White flight, suburbanization, and regional shopping centers are on the rise. It's the dawn of the American century. WCAU captures the leading edge of this post-war wave. They saw it coming and had a plan for reasons practical and symbolic. Those having a hand in the creation of the WCAU building were pioneers of broadcasting, print media, and newspapers. They were architects and builders of the first order, and remarkably, not all male. WCAU is without a doubt one of the most influential buildings on the national scene of the second half of the 20th century, particularly in broadcasting circles. Its design, completion, and success received widespread attention in broadcast and design media. The 26-page profile in the 1953 issue of Broadcast News is a definitive statement on the building's innovative design legacy. It also must be counted among the most consequential and interesting Philadelphia buildings of the 20th century, and perhaps the most important of the 50s. The building on City Line was not the first building built by WCAU to receive national attention. Their radio building at 1622 Chestnut Street was the first purpose-built radio station in this country, and what a remarkable structure it is. The two buildings together can be seen as significant factors in establishing the value of good design and architecture within CBS corporate hierarchy. Aero Saarinen corporate headquarters on 6th Avenue in New York comes out of this legacy. Robert McLean, owner of the Evening Bulletin, also plays a defining role in CAU. Client and longtime friend of architect George Howe, he also understood the fundamental role that architecture can play in corporate identity, efficiency, and reach. He bought CAU from the Levy brothers and the Paleys, who were the founders of CAU in the 20s, and also hired Howe and Brown to design the new Bulletin building at 30th Street. Now let's take a fast-paced whirlwind tour of the building. Here it is at the corner of City Avenue and Monument. That's a 220-foot window wall. You know, modern climate control and sound insulation are all factors that are critically important in a modern production facility for TV and radio. The divisions within the building are important factors in its identity and its character and its success. Seeing the building from City Avenue at night. Understanding that modern media is on the move. So this is a period where you're getting these TV news vans. And so the garage underneath the building is maybe one of the first places that you would house the TV news van. Inside, the building is defined by this, the public space of this building is defined by this really remarkable ramp space that embraces that 220-foot long window wall. And reminds one of the escalators and space within the public rooms of the PSFS building at 12th and Market. The building divides those public spaces from the production facilities where you have the TV and radio studios with their specialized technical requirements. Here, though, you also have windows into the cutting edge media of television. So that's a public viewing window in the main lobby of the master control room for the TV studios. Upstairs, you have the corporate headquarters and spaces designed by Anne Triddick Dickey, who was an important curator at the Museum of Modern Art, one of the curators for organic design and home furnishings, which really launched mid-century modern furniture and aesthetics. Eero Saarinen, Charles Eames are included in that exhibition, and Dickey was the curator along with Elliot Noyes and Peter Blake. And she was hired to do the interiors for CAU. Within the studios themselves, you have an incredibly important technical section, meaning that you have to house a lot of equipment, and the section of the roof is the space where that happens. Here's Studio one of 3 studios where you had a public audience in place. Here's the control room looking down into that space. The glass, incredibly important. It looks like normal glass, but it's layered laminated glass, allowing for the high degree of technical efficiency that was required in the production. Here's a section through that space where they make use of a Vierendeel truss to have the free movement of and placement of services like lighting and sound and other things. You could also hang sets from this space. Here's Studio 2, where you could have a series of different sets laid out for the production of TV programs. And CAU at one time produced 10 to 12 different programs that were aired nationally on CBS network. Here's inside Studio 2, one of their early productions, Action in the Afternoon, which brought the Western, the TV Western to the hills of the Belmont. Here's the set in the back lot of CAU and viewed from an aerial photograph, a little Potemkin city. Here's Studio 3, another early production, Candy Carnival, candy coming from the sponsorship of M&M Mars. And here it is bringing the circus to that area. And just looking at some of the minor spaces and ending, because my time is out, with the dressing room. There's the clowns, the hobo clown, the clown with the bass drum, and then the show's host, Gene Crane, all lined up getting ready for the production. So where this kind of architecture is a reflection of heritage, a reflection of America in the 20th century, a reflection of great design, CAU is something that we should continue to talk about and look at. Next.
Our next presenter, Grace Anyan, is an architectural historian and assistant professor of interior design at Thomas Jefferson University. Grace will be speaking about the Lord & Taylor store on City Line Avenue.
Thanks, Marian. Can you guys all see that? Wait, I probably need to put it on presenter mode. Okay. Okay. On August 3rd, 2020, Lord & Taylor filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy reorganization. 19 stores shutting down at that point, one of which was the Bala Cynwyd location on City Line Avenue in Lower Merion. Today, bricks and mortar retail stores are quickly disappearing or gone due to the dominance of the internet and online shopping, economic recessions, and the pandemic. But 60 years ago, these glamorous department stores were, especially the branches installed in new suburban shopping malls, were the way to the future. Post-War II prosperity meant returning vets and their wives would ditch dense cities, as well as frugal Depression-era thrift and stuffy Victorian decor. Post-war housewives chased glamour and femininity with new dresses, fashion accessories, and cosmetics. These ads from the 50s from the Philadelphia Inquirer show Lord & Taylor's audience, the suburban housewife, with the ad on the left even acknowledging this shift from city to suburbs with the text "City into Country Girl," such a wonderful look. So as the population shifted from city to suburbs, we see this shift in department stores from the grand urban department stores. Here, the first Lord & Taylor New York flagship store design opened in 1914, and then to the streamlined suburban shopping center on the right. So this is the Bala Cynwyd photograph from 1955 of the Bala Cynwyd Lord & Taylor store. Chain stores moved to where the customers were. So the designers responsible for Lord & Taylor were industrial designer Raymond Loewy and his partner, architect and store designer William Snaith. Loewy and Snaith, as Raymond Loewy Associates, reshaped the American department store for the suburban context through the revolutionary idea at the time of conducting user behavior research as primary over what the field of architecture and design typically deemed important form and aesthetics. The Bala Cynwyd Lord & Taylor is significant as a suburban branch store that signaled a sea change in the evolution of the department store building type. So Raymond Loewy was known as the father of industrial design. He redefined modern package design, simplified in comparison with the fussiness of other graphics at the time. His signature styling was known as streamlining. He had a great talent for understanding American consumers and designing in a way that would appeal to them. As his client for Lever House commented about him, Loewy keeps one eye on the imagination and one eye on the cash register. He designed corporate identities or brands for many familiar household products and services, including Lucky Strike cigarette packaging in 1939, the Studebaker Starline Coupe in 1953, and the Greyhound bus in 1954. His design theory was MAIA. The acronym stood for Most Advanced Yet Acceptable. He explained that his experience with consumers' reactions showed that extreme modern design did not always sell well. Loewy's designs were pared back, taking the public taste into account to become quote unquote acceptable. So Lord & Taylor started as a dry goods store in 1826 in New York City. It developed into a department store, a beacon of style and high fashion. This logo on the left, which many of us are familiar with, was designed actually by Raymond Loewy's vice president in the 50s, Andrew Geller. And also familiar, the American Beauty Rose icon, also designed in the 50s. So its mid-century history as a department store. In 1945, Dorothy Shaver became the first woman to head a major retail establishment in the United States as president of Lord & Taylor. As vice president, she worked with the well-known design firm of Raymond Loewy Associates and opened the first branch store in Manhasset, New York, and Long Island, which you see on the right here. So suburban branches really were the future at mid-century. This is an ad that Lord & Taylor created about now we are 13 branch stores. And you're really showing modern architecture as merchandising and branding, this eye-catching and clean modern design that within the context of their shopping centers really stood out amongst the cacophony of commercial development. And the Bala Cynwyd store is on the bottom right here. So here's a view from 1956 of the store from City Line Avenue. So the store design, essentially the interiors were designed by Raymond Loewy Associates. The architects were Fortis and Hamby from New York, and the associate architects were Thalheimer and Weitz of Philadelphia. Loewy revolutionized the old concept of the department store and reinvented it for the post-war lifestyle, attainable luxury for the booming middle class, and the introduction of credit cards. Large multi-story downtown department stores were being replaced by smaller suburban retail centers. And as developers turned the suburban stores into anchors for regional shopping malls, Loewy and Snaith became, for a while, the largest retail and planning consultants in the country. So this series of exterior photos, we see the store essentially as a floating white box with interconnected volumes. Here's some more photos from City Ave with the parking lot, of course, surrounding it as customers come by car now. And we also see these interconnected volumes and notches, boxes are juxtaposed, and even this curve, which this is the beginning of it, but here we see one of the entries raised up, defined by a raised volume with notches and interconnected volumes. And here on the right, we see a nice curve that follows the street. So again, that acknowledgement of the car, which was so important in these suburban branches. So customers came to the shopping center by car and parked away from the main shopping area. Essentially, the stores were inward oriented, which meant that elaborately designed window displays were useless and ineffective as merchandising tools, as they were in the cities. Instead, the store name was emblazoned high on the exterior wall, visible from entry roads. Here, just to give you that view. So essentially for Lowy, it was all about the interior, and really they thought of the architecture as secondary to the customer experience inside. Lowy and Snaith were among the first consultants to explore and research the psychology of consumers. They worked alongside the store staffs and management to develop their design. They designed interiors to encourage buying through more color and employing new technologies and fixtures such as glass display cases and escalators. They conducted a lot of customer research, like tracking their movement through the retail space and noting their reactions to decor and lighting. So this is, completely different from the sort of modern architect approach of theory and concept. Lowy's strategy was how to help stores more efficiently sell their merchandise. He created brighter, lighter, more open spaces, simplifying and modernizing the interior. And he really kind of wanted to make the fixtures invisible to allow the merchandise to be highlighted, and also having a lot of flexibility and changeable fixtures for that. So this is photographs from the 50s of the entrance, the Birdcage. So the Birdcage restaurant was a trendy restaurant in the New York Lord & Taylor. And so they brought that idea to the suburban branches. And as you can see, wasn't afraid of decorative, right? The sort of bad word of decorative design that a lot of modern architects really, really hated. And I wish these photographs were color, but these bold colorful murals, referencing local history, right? We see Benjamin Franklin. Here's Benjamin Franklin on the right, Liberty Bell. So the different branches really acknowledge their local histories. Here's the lady's handbag. And then, and also that they address the audience, right? So within the department store, the department really addressed the audience, specific audience, like for juvenile shoes, like the design becomes very catered to children. So here's more recent photos of the building. So the current plans are to demo the building to make way for apartments. So my takeaways of this presentation, we should preserve Lord & Taylor Bala Cynwyd for the following reasons. It's a unique contribution of commercial modernism. It's a shift away from the urban department store to the suburban branch store, and really exemplifies that modern architectural building type that's more homegrown than high design. And also the significance of Raymond Loewy and his contribution to interdisciplinary design collaborations. He really was the pinnacle of commercial design in the 20th century. American modernism was not Bauhaus, Mies, and Le Corbusier, but instead this homegrown modernism, the Loewys, the Belgettis, the Noguchis, the Saarinen. And just to end with, saving the exterior is probably more realistic, though it's really the interiors that should be saved. Yet it is difficult to imagine that a new occupant would retain the interior, even if it would be retail. Thank you.
Thanks, Grace. Our next presenter is Michael Bixler, a writer, photographer, and managing editor of the online publication Hidden City, Philadelphia. Michael will present The University Motor Inn.
Thanks, Marian, and thanks everybody for showing up tonight. 1 second. Okay, here I go in 5 minutes or less, so hold on to your pants. Until recently, the University Motor Inn was one of the most curious hidden landmarks on the Schuylkill River. The boxy rectangular span on stilts was best viewed by boat or from the University Avenue Bridge. It was built in 1960 as a motor lodge geared towards the families of students and visitors of the University of Pennsylvania. In an incredibly odd turn of events, the building was acquired by the Philadelphia prison system for their University Avenue facility in 1997. Alas, I am sad to report that while in good shape and highly reusable, the Mid-Mod Motel was demolished last month by Pico Energy Company. In the late 1950s, Stanley Sloat, a developer and builder who operated the Scarsdale, New York-based company Crossway Construction, purchased a plot of land on the Schuylkill River from the Pennsylvania Railroad. Sloat was in the middle of establishing a national chain of motels called Crossway Motor Inn. For the University Motor Inn, the developer hired New York architect Henry H. Moger Jr. to design the 90-room motel with a pool, bar, restaurant, lounge, and a large parking lot along University Avenue. The motel was a resounding success, and by 1961, plans were developed to provide an extra 57 units to the building, but the addition was never built. It's a nice postcard from the 1960s of the motel, the front, which is usually not seen along University Avenue, because most people don't drive down University Avenue in that direction. Ooh. Let's see. 1 second. In an interesting turn of events, Sloat, the owner, left the real estate world for a second career in academia and sold the successful motel to the University of Pennsylvania in 1964. Penn converted the old motel into dorm rooms for med students, which lasted until 1971. The university had planned to renovate and expand the building for a return to lodging, but abandoned the idea and instead leased the old motel to the West Philadelphia Community Mental Health Consortium in 1973. The consortium bought the motel in 1982 and turned it into a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center with clinical offices, vocational workshops, and a cafeteria. In 1987, Jerry Med purchased the property and used it for providing services for mental health patients. That's the front of the motel in 2016. In one of the strangest adaptive reuse undertakings in recent Philadelphia history, the Philadelphia Suburban Development Corporation, which purchased the mid-century property in 1997, converted the old motel into a halfway house for 180 work release offenders. Inmates were required to participate in a community reentry program provided by Fire Tree Ltd, a nonprofit that engages inmates with vocational training, job placement, counseling, and life skills education. If anyone here has ever had the pleasure of taking that old pontoon boat ride along the Schuylkill River Trail with the Schuylkill River Development Corporation on one of their seasonal river tours back in the mid to late aughts, you may remember inmates smiling and waving hello from the windows of the Mid-Mod prison cells. It was a very surreal, very Philly experience. Inmate reentry operations ceased in 2014 and the building sat vacant for 5 years. In 2019, Pico seized the motel through eminent domain from the owner, Philadelphia Suburban Development Corporation, which came as a surprise. The PSDC and local politicians had laid generous zoning groundwork for anticipated commercial redevelopment of the parcel. Sadly, as of Monday this week, the only thing that's left of the University Motor Inn is a pile of rubble and a few stray pilings at the water's edge. Pico plans to build a new electric substation facility in its place, which I think is a visionless outcome and a wasted opportunity given the motel's inherent potential for reuse as a commercial kayaking or water sports rental facility or nature center or lodging for ecological tourism and other uses that could have attracted and elevated public attention to the great environmental revival of the Schuylkill and Delaware rivers, both once poisonous industrial waste bins that are gradually being rehabilitated into clean and thriving waterways. And that's time.
Thanks, Michael. Our next presenter, Allie Davis, is an architectural historian and is the Philadelphia chapter's president. Allie will speak to us about the Philadelphia Police Administration Building, also known as the Roundhouse.
All right, sorry, bear with me. I've lost my screens. I apologize, everybody. Try this again. All right, this doesn't seem to like full screen, so we're just gonna have to look at it this way. So bear with me. So hi, everybody. Good evening. Thank you all for being here. So the next building we're going to be talking about is the Philadelphia Police Headquarters, or commonly known as the Roundhouse. And so the Roundhouse is at risk because the Philadelphia Police Department plans to vacate and relocate to the former Inquirer building, which would leave this significant modern architectural resource at risk for demolition to make way for new development. So the Roundhouse is located on the south side of Race Street between 7th and 8th Streets, across from Franklin Square and proximate to Chinatown and Independence National Historical Park. It was designed in 1959 by Geddes, Brecker, Qualls, and Cunningham, and built by 1962. The structural engineer was August Commandant, and the principal consulting engineer was David Bloom. The building was officially dedicated on April 1st, 1963, and GBQC was awarded the AIA's Gold Medal Award for Best Philadelphia Architecture that same year. So more often than not, people see the Roundhouse, they see it's concrete, and they think brutalism. I, on the other hand, tend to argue that the Roundhouse is more reflective of Expressionism, or technically Neo-Expressionism. Brutalism is technically typically characterized as monolithic, hulking, massive, and blocky, whereas Expressionism is characterized as expressive, sculptural, sweeping curved wall surfaces, minimal use of symmetrical or geometric forms, and experimental in materials. So with that in mind, think about Eero Saarinen's TWA Flight Center, Skidmore, Owing and Merrill's chapel at the US Air Force Academy, and Marcel Breuer's headquarters for HUD in DC. So these buildings use elements that are reflective of the Expressionist style, which we also see with the Roundhouse. We see the buildings curving, almost poetic wall surfaces that are more evocative of Expressionism than the brutalist misnomer that's generally applied. GBQC formed in 1959 following then Mayor Richardson Dilworth's commission to design a headquarters for the police, who were then operating out of the basement of City Hall. A few years prior, GBQC completed a design for the Pender Laboratory building on Penn's campus, now demolished, but which utilized a concrete structural frame that housed the mechanical and electrical systems, making this an integrated building system. And we'll see this concept of an integrated building system more fully realized on a much larger scale with their design for the Roundhouse. Before their design for Pender Laboratory, we had Robert Geddes and Melvin Brecker playing with round forms in their submission for the Sydney Opera House design competition, again, which will resurface in their design for the Roundhouse. So this, all right, so the Philadelphia School. GBQC, or more specifically, Robert Geddes, was part of a group of architects and engineers, which was coined in a 1961 Progressive Architecture article as the Philadelphia School. This group, the article argued, included Lou Kahn, Robert Venturi, Romualdo Giorgiola, and 2 engineers, one of which was commandant. The basic principles of the Philadelphia School were that these architects and engineers sought to return the urban environment to a more human scale and to more thoughtfully engage the public with their architecture. So arguably, GBQC sought to do that here with the design of the roundhouse. The rectilinear concrete panels that define the majority of the building's boundaries were meant to relate to Philadelphia's grid plan. The plaza on the north side of the building, housing the intended primary entrance, was positioned to deliberately face Franklin Square and act as a welcoming civic entrance. GBQC didn't just use round forms because it was interesting or different. They felt it would lead to the most efficient use of interior space as shown here in plan. They designed the wings at the ends to be highly efficient, even though they felt they flanked a less efficient but spatially exciting single-loaded corridor. The urban myth that the building was designed to resemble handcuffs is unfounded, and the building's form was not meant to elicit any connection between the design and the building's use. The round forms that we see on the outside and in plan are reflected in the building's interior design, as seen here in these photos, as well as here, and even expressed in the small detail designs for the exit lights. So the building's character defining a round form and mass were made possible in part by the engineering prowess of August Commandant, who GBQC hired to oversee the design, production, and installation of the precast concrete panels. In a phrase that I think really does Commandant justice, preservation architect Jack Pypern once referred to him as a, quote, structural engineering cowboy. Over 90% of the building structure is concrete. There are nearly 2,000 precast concrete units that were created using shock baton. Cast in place concrete was limited to the footings, foundations, corridor flows, and the 4 elevator stair cores. This acted as formwork or an anchor to which to attach the precast concrete panels. One of the significant features of the roundhouse is that its precast concrete panels help to house the building's structural, mechanical, and electrical systems, making this a fully integrated building system like we saw in their earlier work for Pender Laboratory. Unfortunately, however, this makes modernizing or altering the building challenging. Shock baton, this process used to cast the panels was a method that originated in Holland and which literally means shocked concrete in Dutch. With this process, the molds are set on a calibrated vibrating table. The motion during the casting process allows for the use of a zero slump concrete mixture, which results in a stronger, more uniform finish. The roundhouse is the second known building in the United States to use the shock baton process for precasting concrete. The first known building is Philip Johnson's Lake Pavilion in New Canaan, Connecticut. In addition to casting the panels using shock baton, Commandant had the concrete posts tensioned, which is a technique of pre-stressing that uses steel cables to add tensile strength and which promoted the absolute structural potential of the concrete. Thanks to these methods, guided by Commandant's engineering expertise, the building continues to maintain a high level of structural performance, further making it a tragedy to lose since it's still in such good serviceable condition. So how can we save this building? The biggest challenge for the roundhouse's long-term preservation is that it's a city-owned property. We feel there's potential for its adaptive reuse and have seen a number of ideas explored that reimagine this important building in thoughtful and exciting ways. We do have a nomination drafted for listing the roundhouse in the Philadelphia Register and intend to submit it soon. It's important that we approach this nomination process strategically, since the city's historical commission doesn't have the best track record of reviewing nominations for city-owned properties in a timely manner. We want to make sure the nomination has the backing it needs to move through the channels to ensure it's reviewed and the building is ultimately listed in the Philadelphia Register, which is what will afford the roundhouse protection with the most teeth and help to secure a fighting chance for its long-term preservation as a significant example of modern architecture in Philadelphia. And with that, I do want to plug Jack Pyburn's talk tomorrow at 5:30. He is going to be speaking on the roundhouse and will surely provide way more detail than I was able to provide in this short amount of time. So thank you all very much.
Thanks, Allie. Our last presenter is Dan Macy, a board member of Docomomo, Philadelphia, as well as the Chestnut Hill Conservancy. He is a food historian and lover of mid-century architecture. Dan will speak to us about the Shipley White House in Chestnut Hill.
Whoops. Hello. 1 second. Hi. As Marianne says, I'm Dan Macy, a board member of Philadelphia Docomomo. My husband and I own the Louis Kahn designed Margaret Esherick House in Chestnut Hill. I've been involved in working to preserve another architectural gem, the Dorothy Shipley White House, located not very far from my own home. Let me tell you the story of the amazing example of modernist architecture. The Dorothy Shipley White House is located at 717 Glengarry Road in the Chestnut Hill section of Philadelphia. Commissioned by Dorothy Shipley White, the house was designed in 1962 and constructed in 63-64 by the Philadelphia firm of Mitchell Jurgula. The house consists of flat-roofed, stucco-clad concrete cubes of various heights that look different from every angle. A dark brick chimney seen top right is the only exterior element not covered in white stucco. The resulting structure is said to represent a high point in international style modernist principles in the United States. Here is the T-shaped floor plan of the house, which is quite sizable, of about 4,000 square feet. The large dramatic first floor living room on the left shoots up 2 stories with elongated casement windows. The original floor plan includes a kitchen, a laundry, a pantry, a cocktail room, and 2 rooms for servants, reflecting the affluent lifestyle of Shipley White. The second floor plan includes a master bedroom, guest bedroom, and a studio. Angled walls in the bedroom give natural light to the space while allowing privacy. The architect, Romualdo Jurgula, known as Aldo, was born in Rome in 1920 and died in 2016 at the age of 95. Educated in Rome and at Columbia University, Jurgula formed an architectural firm in Philadelphia in 1958 with Erwin Mitchell. After teaching at Penn, he became the chair of the Columbia University School of Architecture while maintaining his Philadelphia office. One of the firm's earliest works was a visitor's center for the Wright Brothers National Memorial at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, seen at the bottom left. It was one of the first modernist efforts of the National Park Service and is a registered national landmark. In 1980, his firm won an international competition to design a new Australian Parliament building in Canberra, which is the building for which Jurgula is probably most famous. He won AIA's gold medal in 1982. Jurgula and his family moved permanently to Australia. Now, we shouldn't ignore the significant role of architect Erwin Mitchell, the Mitchell and Mitchell Jurgula, to the success of the firm. It was said that Mitchell knew how to translate Jurgula's drawing better than anyone. He was tasked with the administrative side of the firm and with the execution of Jurgula's designs. He stayed in Philadelphia while Jurgula moved to Australia and served as the president of the American Institute of Architects. He died in 2005 at the age of 80. Here is also a photo of the house that Mitchell designed in 1956 for himself in Lafayette Hill, just outside of Chestnut Hill. In Philadelphia, Mitchell Jurgula designed the United Fund, now United Way building on the Parkway, the Penn Mutual Building Addition, and the old pavilion that housed the Liberty Bell, and a wonderful garage at 35th and Walnut Streets. The Shipley White House represents one of the only few residential buildings designed by Jurgula, and for that reason is even more special. Jurgula envisioned the house as a series of overlapping and interdependent volumes. Ben Leach, a former Docomomo Philadelphia board member who wrote the preservation nomination application, concluded the application this way, quote, "From its privileging of specific client needs over universal architectural theorems, to its expression of architectural form as a choreographed sequence of experiences, to its incorporation of certain reoccurring functional and aesthetic details, The house is of unquestionable significance to 20th century Philadelphia in the evolution of modern American architecture, unquote. Well said, Ben. Jergela's design completes the trio of significant modern houses in Chestnut Hill. Together, Robert Venturi, Louis Kahn, and Romualda Jergela were dubbed the Philadelphia School, as Ali talked about earlier, after the Progressive Architecture magazine published an article in the work in 1961. The house received immediate critical acclaim. In 1965, Progressive Architecture magazine noted, "The house is an interesting study in contrasts, as the stark, precise volumes of the building stand in relation to the random forms of nature, as the powerful contemporary interior spaces set off the delicate, elegant furnishings of other periods, as the masculinity of the architecture shell contrasts with the femininity the owner has impressed on the house. In this instance, architect and owner have managed to balance their contributions to a remarkable degree, supplementing each other with sensitivity," unquote. Now, just who was this client? The remarkable client was Dorothy Shipley White. After her husband died in 1959, Shipley White moved from her family's country house to Chestnut Hill and asked Jergela to build her, quote, "a small house with a large sense of space," unquote. He responded, I could go up cheaper than out." Here's a wedding photo of Shipley White from 1924 and a photo of Dorothy and her husband, Thomas Rayburn White, a prominent city lawyer and civic leader. She raised their 3 children as well as caring for 3 stepchildren. Shipley White earned a bachelor's degree from Bryn Mawr College and Temple University, a master's of arts from Columbia University, and a PhD in diplomatic history from the University of Pennsylvania. She was a noted scholar on France and French politics and is said to have been personal friends with Charles de Gaulle. Her first book, Seeds of Discord, was published to wide acclaim in 1964. She was often written about in the society pages of the Enquirer and Bulletin and supported a variety of art and charity organizations. She was also a sometime sculptor and is said to have an eclectic taste in interior design. A photo essay article was published in 1977 in the Philadelphia Enquirer entitled Color Scheming that focused mostly on White's interior design talents, but also gave some insight into the client-architect relationship. The article notes that since Mrs. White wanted room separation and also a feeling of flowing space for easy entertaining, the house was designed with the major areas, living room, dining room, and den office, each structurally defined, but linked by the stately entrance hallway. The photo on the left is the front hall entrance leading into the grand living room. The photo on the right is standing in the living room looking toward the front door. The passage on the left leads to the kitchen. The Enquirer article noted that Shipley White was very fond of her design choices. Her travels are well represented with a host of items, such as African batik wall hangings and a collection of Moroccan rugs. She is quoted in the article, "I bring back things whenever I travel, and as you can see, I get around quite a bit. When I tell people the living room is peach pink, they are horrified. But when they come in, they somehow always love it." And it's interesting to note what neighbors apparently thought of the house and how many that maybe even Shipley White thought it stood out a bit too much in the neighborhood. The Enquirer article notes, quote, "Stark angularity of the Mitchell Jergela designed house is partially shrouded in shrubbery. Dorothy Shipley White, Chestnut Hill individualist, says her neighbors find the house more palatable now than when it was built in 1963. Philadelphia County Court of Common Pleas Judge Tamla Clark and her husband Peter bought the property in 1998. After the death of Peter in 2015, the house was left mostly vacant and neglected. Years of trying to locate the judge by a number of organizations has failed. Together, the Philadelphia chapter of Docomomo, the Chestnut Hill Conservancy, The Preservation Alliance of Philadelphia and the Office of Mitchell Jurgla sought to have the property listed on Philadelphia's Registry of Historic Structures. In 2017, the property was designated historic by the city's Historic Commission, joining both Kahn's Escher House and Venturi's Mother's House. Just following the historic designation, Lori Salganikoff of the Chestnut Hill Conservancy located the judge who was taking care of her ailing father in Maryland. Clark said she was not aware of the historic designation nor the severe neglected state of the building. She did agree to hire someone to clean up the yard and cut down the overgrown ivy that was destroying the stucco of the house. But more could be done. But before more could be done, Judge Clark died last January. Here are some recent photos of the outside of the house and showing the state of its condition. Judge Clark's estate, led by her brother, has been busy since her death, first removing dumpsters full of items from the house, then removing tons of vegetation and leaves from the roof, and most recently performing mold mitigation inside the house after years of visible water damage. The estate has yet to say when they plan to put the house on the market. The Chestnut Hill Conservancy has forwarded the names of multiple people who have expressed interest in breathing new life into the treasure. So the future, I hope, is looking brighter for the Aldo Jurgla masterpiece. With the aid of preservation-minded organizations and the support of the community, soon new stewards for this remarkable house with a remarkable cultural and artistic pedigree will be found to ensure the Jurgla Chestnut Hill legacy will be admired and enjoyed for generations to come. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. And thanks to all of our panelists for the insightful presentations. Now our panel will answer some of the questions you asked during the presentation. So let's start with, what is the connection between Docomomo and the Preservation Alliance for Greater Philadelphia, and how do the organizations coordinate?
Ali, do you want to take that?
Sure. So our chapter, Docomomo Philadelphia, is connected to Docomomo US, which is a larger national organization dedicated to the preservation and promotion of modern resources, which could be buildings, objects, or landscapes. And so our mission is really focused on things of the modern era. The Preservation Alliance for Greater Philadelphia covers all aspects of preservation issues in Philadelphia, from all eras of architecture, all types of resources. So we do collaborate with them and partner when it makes sense. They're great allies and colleagues, and we work together whenever we can.
It would be interesting to explore how the adjacent existing Bala-Cynwyd Shopping Center did or didn't respond to the Lord and Taylor design.
Hi, Kevin. That's a good question. So the whole shopping center was designed by Thalheimer and Weitz. I actually have a photograph of it. Here, let me just pull that up really quick. So here it is. So the same associate architecture firm did do the rest of the shopping center, with Lord and Taylor being sort of the anchor department store. So Raymond Loewy didn't work on the rest of the shopping center, but yeah.
And when was the shopping center demolished?
I mean, it's still there. It's been, renovated
Okay.
and changed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. How about, what are the current plans for WCAU?
So the building I think it's vacant now. I mean, it's still owned by NBC Comcast. At some point in the 90s, there was this strange flip where CBS and NBC's flipped their stations. So while CAU was a CBS affiliate for many years, the building is now owned by NBC. It was used by the Univision channel for a while. So I think it's not clear what the future intent is relative to the building. It is on the historical register in Lower Merion, but it's not the highest level, which I believe is Class A. And Class A would afford it a higher degree of protection, and specifically with respect to demolition. Demolition, I believe, is allowed under its current status. And so I think there's others, at Jefferson, who are looking at potential future adaptive reuse possibilities. And I think it's just a place that we really should think creatively about how we can re-envision a positive future for the building. I think its historical interest and design qualities are definitely something we'd want to have for future generations.
Allie, can you talk about the rumor that the police building was intentionally designed to resemble handcuffs?
Yes, so that was totally a coincidence. They did not intend for the building and plan to resemble handcuffs or a dumbbell. They were just enamored with the round form and felt strongly at the time that it was the most efficient use of space. Although I think some years later, Bob Geddes wrote a few articles indicating that turned out to not be the case, and a round form was actually not the most ideal use for a space, but totally coincidental.
And what kind of reputation does the police administration building have among the local Philadelphians? And is there any hope for support from the wider audience?
I think in my experience in speaking with people about the Roundhouse, I find that people either love it or hate it. People seem to have a strong opinion one way or the other. For a variety of reasons. Either they find it ugly, or they don't like the police, and so that association is too much for them to appreciate the building's architecture. That's all totally fair. So I think it's pretty divided no matter who you talk to. And as for the support from the wider audience, again, it goes both ways. As we have been, I've been at trying to save the Roundhouse since I was in grad school almost 10 years ago, part of the Save the Roundhouse effort, which some people may be familiar with. And it's always gained good traction over the years. And I think that there's enough support to, see its adaptive reuse for a very good public use.
Okay, thanks. How do you feel about the Schuylkill Yards project and the taking over of the Bulletin building?
I guess that could be a question for me, but it's maybe also for everybody on the panel. And so this refers to the Howe and Brown building that faces 30th Street and the, in a sense, the changing of the facade, right? So, on the one hand, once the Bulletin left and that great kind of monumental brick facade, with the incredible lettering and the zipper sign, there was the electric zipper sign on it. They brought the windows around and kind of made it conventional and took away the monumentality of the building. So in some ways, what they've done, this is Kieran Timberlake, brings back a kind of monumental expression to the facade, and I find that interesting, especially since the facade was already changed in the past. And I think the urbanism and the dynamic around that building are maybe changed a lot since the Bulletin was there. If you look at the history of the Bulletin and some of the images from that area, I mean, there can be crowds of people gathered around during elections. The kind of the heartbeat of the Bulletin in the lives of everyday Philadelphians being kind of a center for how they were getting news. And, as a demonstration of how much the media environment has changed in our world, and, how much it's a placeless thing in some ways now. So, that it gives over, that the Bulletin building now is given over to something of, more typical, incubator, urbanism, I think it's all right, I guess, but I haven't given it a lot of thought, honestly. So.
Okay, anyone else? Another comment is, I know modernism flourished in California when the style first came to the United States. Can you discuss any quirks, mishaps, or unique details where these architects adapted or didn't adapt modernism for the East Coast?
I feel like Bill would be really good at answering this question.
Well, first I would say that, Howe and Lescaz in September of 1926, just in time for this, 1929, just in time for the school year, opened the Oak Lane Country Day School. And so we had, what could be argued early examples of international style modernism before the international style was a phrase here in Philadelphia. So I might challenge the idea that modernism emerges first in California. I think there was plenty of it here in Philadelphia in the 20s and 30s. And it really, what makes it Philadelphia modernism interesting is that it's there's an active and engaged debate about what is modernism, right? The modern classicism of the people working on the Philadelphia Museum of Art, is modern, right? Just as modern, in some ways as the PSFS building. And, the architectural, talent that's in this area really made it an interesting debate. And people like Lou Kahn, Bob Venturi, and others kind of come out of that brew that was going on through the 20s and 30s. But what makes it particular? I think it's that we're a place that has a history, and I think that there's something, wonderful about Quaker restraint that, how decided a factor it is. I think it's a presence, and, that things, are in relation to one another. So I think the kind of great flourishing that happens in the 50s around, planning, architecture, landscape, ecology, comes out of that, what we do in the world, change, as builders, as architects and landscape architects, changes, the patterns and the experiences around, and that matters. And that it took a while for that to grip, the rest of the world, but I would say that it was going on here in the 20s and 30s.
Okay. Does anyone have any inside scoop on the development of the rail park and the underground tunnels adjacent to it?
A little off topic, but so I can't remember what the most recent development is on the city branch. There's two entrances to the city branch in that tunnel that you're speaking of. One is accessible from Pennsylvania Avenue, right across, speaking of early modernism, from Cray's Parkway. I can't remember what the number is, but the Parkway house that Paul Cray designed. And that's still open, and there's still an active train in one of the tubes. On the other side, where the Ninth District Police Department's station is, below grade was a lot that they used to use for a parking lot. That is now being built. I think it's called the Radian or something. It's a new massive luxury high rise. And so that effectively cuts off at least one entrance to the city branch tunnel, which kills any kind of plans that were kind of gesticulating for the last 10, 15 years of turning it into an underground park or returning light rail to that tunnel. So I think it's kind of just in limbo.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions. So I think that's, we've gotten to everyone. Just again, want to thank all of our presenters for their insight, and thank you to everyone who attended tonight. Thank you for coming out, so to speak, for Philadelphia Modernism 2020. And please don't forget, you can join our chapter at docomomophl.com. And if no one else has anything to add, I think that concludes our presentation tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.